Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Dan Berger. Dan is a legend in our industry. He had a wonderful exit a few years ago, and he's working now on a book called The Quest, where he talks about belonging. We're going to speak about his journey. We're going to speak about entrepreneurship. We're going to speak about some kind of depression when you sell your business. And we're going to speak as well about belonging and DEI and how this is applied in corporation. Enjoy my conversation with Dan Berger. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. And today I'm extremely happy to have someone back. It's been 2 years already. He's a legend in our industry, a true entrepreneur, true American dream. We're going to talk about his journey. We're going to talk about what he's doing now. We're going to talk about the need to belong. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Dan Berger. How are you, Dan?
Woo! Doing good. How many people have you had back on here, Eric?
Very few.
Okay, I joined a very esteemed class.
Very few. I haven't checked. I would say it's probably, you can count it with one hand.
Unbelievable. I'm honored.
Yeah. And I love the post you made about the need to belong. And we're definitely going to talk about that. But first thing first, let's go back to little Dan, the American dream journey and, the challenge you had to face. So what is your journey?
I would say my journey is a compilation of managing childhood traumas. But as soon as you say that, you realize, wait, that's not just me, it's everybody. We're the products of, the traumas we've had throughout our lives. And certainly for me, the trauma of adoption, the trauma of my parents divorcing, and the trauma of immigration, all those three before the age of 9 played a very important role in my development. And I would say that I wouldn't have been able to have the success I have today without the United States of America.
That's, wow. Trilogy, I don't know you say in English, but like... again,
trifecta.
Trifecta, yeah. That's
I get all the badges, all the trauma badges.
So you arrived in the US when you were 8, 9?
That's right. Yep. When I was 8 3/4.
How was it to be a kid in a school at that moment?
Well, it was the summer between 3rd and 4th grade. We came to New York City and I hated my mom at the time. I hated my stepdad for dragging my mom and myself subsequently to the United States. I missed my friends, my community, my sense of belonging in Israel. The language, I spoke no English, literally. And the first year was really, I'd say the first probably like quarter. The first 3 months were really tough because it's school and people have established cliques and they are speaking a language you don't understand. And every day I come home and have to do homework with my mom to for her to translate what's going on. So it was really tough, but it certainly strengthened me and gave me, I think, one of the things I talk about in belonging is something I call belonging intelligence, which is basically like emotional intelligence, but for belonging. So like EQ, but BQ. And one of the things you need in order to be good at belonging is high risk tolerance and embracing kind of falling on your face. It's like joining, 9 different organizations to realize you actually belong in the 10th one. Mm-hmm. But so you got to keep trying. So I think it really strengthened me in that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I can only remember my own experience with my kids. The eldest one was 10 when we came here, and none of them knew English. The bullying, the mean kids, and the second one, I remember one day she told me that one day she was at school, and there was the girl next to her that started crying, and my daughter's being very empathic, wanted to console her and see what she was doing, and actually, the teacher came and asked her why she was crying. And she said, I don't want to sit next to Shirelle because she doesn't speak English. She's stupid. And obviously, when you're faced with those things, our kids are so resilient. And you went through that. And when I see how you are today, I'm very hopeful. And I see how old they are. I'm very hopeful for my daughters. But
how old are they now?
Now they are 21, 18, and almost 14.
Yeah. So that happened when it was a little bit more internet, a little bit more. Yeah, that's tough.
Oh, you can add. Oh, yeah, you can add that as well. But going back to you, Dan, how did you cope with it? With your parents your mom and stepdad were supportive, or you had 1 or 2 friends you can count on? How did you find the resilience at that age to to move forward?
Well, it's just about the language thing. I think sometimes a lot of people hear an accent, like you have an accent when you speak English, and or they don't see somebody else speaking English and they think, oh, they're not as smart. But actually, I challenge it. I say they're actually smarter because they speak more than one language.
Right?
So anyway, the way I cope with it is, I would say I leaned into my natural leadership abilities. And I remember this very clearly. My birthday is November, so late November. So basically the school year started in late August, early September. So I had September, October, November, 3 months to get my feet on the ground. And I had a birthday coming up and I was like, you know what? F it. Let me organize a birthday party and invite the kids who were like the leaders in the class. And I invited these folks who I had kind of I saw as a threat. And that's how we became friends. So I went from a kind of, I would say, kid in the corner status to kind of young leader status. But it really hurt because, for example, I remember there was choir tryouts early on in the year, and there were 24 kids in the class, and myself and a kid named Eugene, who was an immigrant from the Soviet Union at the time, were the only two kids who didn't get into choir out of 24. So every Friday we would sit in the classroom, and down the hall we'd hear the rest of the class harmonizing, and we'd sit in an empty classroom. I mean, the cruelty of not letting fourth graders into the choir is so stupid.
Exactly. What kind of idiots
it developed resilience.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a very poor educational decision, I think, for the school.
Absolutely.
I should go back and give a donation and make it a choir for everyone donation, kind of like endow choir for those who can't sing.
Why not? Yeah, absolutely. So you go through the school system. Did you go to college afterwards or just yeah?
Yes, I went to private school until 8th grade. Then I went to public school for high school. Then I went to City College, part of the City University of New York system for college. And then I went to private school for grad school. So my public school in the middle and, private school at the both ends, nothing too fancy. Yeah. And then growing up in Israel, obviously the military plays that's where we immigrated from. The military plays an important role in society. So I think in my subconscious, I had this kind of desire to do public service. So I thought I'm going to go work for the government. And I went and worked for a member of Congress for 4 years after graduating college. And then I thought to myself, okay, I'll go get an MBA so I can apply business skills to government. So I remember going to business school at the Georgetown, and it was like, I want to be an investment banker. I want to be a consultant. And I said to myself, well, I want to be a government employee. But then my summer internship between first year and second year of business school was at FEMA.
Yeah.
And everybody's people are going to Deutsche Bank and BCG and Procter and Gamble, and I'm going to FEMA. And I remember I finished my internship after that summer, and I was like, I'm never working for government again. It was so dysfunctional. It took them a week to give me a tour of the office.
Wow.
Literally. So it taught me a lot about onboarding. It taught me a lot about HR and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I decided to shift gears a little bit and essentially drop the idea of working for the government. But I always had a calling to serve for public service because of the role the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, plays in Israeli society.
Yeah, it's on that note, I was just reading a testimonial of a soldier that actually came from Gaza after fighting for many days. And he was saying that he was back in people discussing politics and stuff like that. And he was missing being there because at least there they were like one. It was one unit there all together, which I think was very profound. So you decide not to work for FEMA or for government. But when did you decide that you are an entrepreneur and that you want to have your own business and make your own calls?
Well, I don't think entrepreneurship is for everyone. I think we live in a society where entrepreneurship is glorified. You could be an entrepreneur by creating content. You could be an entrepreneur by making something in your basement. You could be an entrepreneur by building websites for other people. There's a difference between sole proprietors, and that's all the categories I just mentioned, and entrepreneurs. And I think everybody was an entrepreneur, there'd be no employees. So we got to chill with this idea that everybody should be an entrepreneur. They should certainly be self-employed if they want to be. But I do think there are some intrinsic qualities that come from your genetic set point that make you a better entrepreneur than others. There's certainly skills you can develop and whatever, but I did not discover that until I jumped in headfirst into, starting my last company. I did have a web design agency that employed a few people during college, but my startup Social Tables that I went on to selling for $100 million to Cvent was a side project that grew legs and started with tummy time and ended up running.
When you start a business, any business, you basically have to do everything yourself. Now, the goal of structuring and scaling, it's obviously to start focusing as soon as possible on what you do best and delegate the rest. Did you learn that the hard way, or was it something that was very clear in your mind?
Okay, this is really hard for me to say, especially publicly. I think I am better at most things than most people when it comes to business. I can say that empirically, like I can prove that. And I think many great entrepreneurs are the same way. Like, you have to be, and a lot of the joke is like jack of all trades, master of none. Like, I think I'm jack of all trades, like not master, but pretty good at many things when it comes to business. So setting up systems, creating a business development process, understanding finance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this thinking was probably much worse when I was running the business, and it probably prevented me from hiring more senior executives. It's why my average age at Social Tables, despite a workforce of 120, was 27.
Right. Would you do it differently if you had to do it again?
So it's a trick question, because if I was doing it now, I would do it differently.
Yeah.
At the time, you would have told me a million times, do it this way. And I'd be like, nope, I'm not going to. But yes, of course I would do it differently. But I just love learning, and I love the challenge of improving and, optimizing, and reorganizing. So the persons I hire, I think one of the skills they need to have is the ability to teach me, not so I can do their job, but so that I can improve and I can do better. And I think therefore it'd be less intimidating if you hire somebody more senior. You have to hire somebody, again, if that's your style, you have to hire somebody who's willing to teach and bring others along with them, as opposed to folks who are like, don't worry, I got this. Nobody likes that.
No, absolutely. I was raised in Belgium, and there is like, you have to work on all your weaknesses. And one day I went like, no, I want to work on my strength, and I want to surround myself with people that their strength is my weaknesses, instead of trying to improve my weaknesses. So it's not that I need to be doing everything or improve on everything.
There's a concept of leadership called strength-based leadership, which is the idea that you should be improving the things you're strong at, unless you have fatal flaws. And fatal flaws they're almost like really good strengths are like a halo effect, where people who are really good communicators oftentimes come off as really good presenters and really good writers. And it has this halo effect, even to not just impacting adjacent skills, but also giving others the impression that you're good at things you may not be good at. So there's this halo effect of really having good strengths. But if people have fatal flaws, they need to address them. So if somebody, for example, is a terrible communicator, and communication is a key component of leadership, then you need to work on your communication, full stop, because it's going to prevent you from becoming the leader you can be.
Agree. And you mentioned that you sell the company. Was that always an objective for you, or yes? And did you had a number in mind, or just like until I get that, or the offer came and you said, okay, this is something way beyond what I was hoping for, and I'll go for it?
I can definitively tell you that I started the business not wanting to sell, not thinking about selling. Of course, as you take on institutional investment like I did, raising about $25 million, there are expectations for a sale. But again, I never had that in mind. And I therefore focused on, there's that book, Built to Sell, I think it's called, where it's like, I never thought about it that way. There he's got it. It's great. Exactly. Yeah. There you go. And like, I never thought about things that way. Yeah, I never thought about things that way. It's like I wanted to build a great business, and I think I did. And my number was, I was like, if I do sell, it's going to be 100. And so at the time, basically, I advise a lot of entrepreneurs this. You should have an agreement with a banker who comes to the board on a quarterly basis and gives like a market update. And you
Mhm.
can pay them a small retainer. I think our retainer was like 5 grand or something like that, or maybe even less, 3 grand a month. And they would come in every board meeting. They'd do a 30-minute presentation on the state of the market. And then at some point, the board approves a market test. Just, having the banker go out and say, if this company was for sale, then would you be interested? And coming back and reporting. And I always said, only talk to me if the number is 100. But the banker knew that. And the banker got me 100. So it was almost kind of like manifested.
Cool. For those listening, it would seem that, okay, you get the number. Obviously, it's a big number and you're set for life. And most entrepreneurs that have sold their business, regardless of the number, go through a phase of depression afterwards. And for people listening, it might sound crazy. You sold the business for 100 million. How could you even think about being depressed? Did you go through that phase as well?
I wouldn't call it, yes. I mean, the answer is yes. I'm not sure if I'd call it depression. I think I'd call it boredom. And boredom probably leads to depression or vice versa. I don't know. But you have to remember, I sold in 5 years ago. We're recording in late December. I sold in late October 2018. I stayed on board until November 2019. So basically, 4 years ago is when I left the business I started. At the time, I was already gearing up for my next thing. I was looking, I guess, let's break some news. I was under contract to acquire meetup.com. I had a deal accepted. We were doing due diligence. The deal fell apart. At the time, WeWork was owned it. And so I was already kind of like, I had my next thing. I was like, okay, when I'm leaving Social Tables, the company I started. And by the way, I left $1.5 million on the table when I sold. Had I stayed for another year, I would have got another 1.5 million because I had a $3 million deferred income. So first year of staying, I got 1.5 million that they owed me on top of my salary. And then the second year, I was going to get another 1.5 million. And I said, you know what? I'm not trying to do this anymore. Like I integrated the business. Everybody's happy. This is going well. There's no reason for me to stay. I'm just getting frustrated. I'm dealing with too much corporate stuff. So let me leave and go try to buy Meetup. So I was under contract, made an offer. The deal fell apart, and then COVID happened. So in a way, right, because this was, again, late Q4 2019, COVID and lockdown started Q1 2020. So I dodged a bullet because the valuation, I mean, dropped by 90% for Meetup
Yeah.
because they're a live event company. And then B, COVID just changed everything. I was going to move to New York City from DC. I was going to, do all this stuff, whatever. So then COVID happened. So I didn't even have the chance to be depressed, is my point, because the whole world went into basically depression and everybody tried to cope with that. So the collective depression, in a way, overrode my personal depression.
Mhm. So you go through that phase with the entire world, and also you're looking at your next thing. Is it the search of meaning? Is it the search of belonging? What is it exactly?
So there's a book called by a guy named Bob Buford. It's called Halftime. In this book, Mr. Buford talks about it's for post liquidity, and once you have a liquidity event, that's your first half of your life, and the second half. In order to start the second half, he says you need something called halftime, and halftime is basically a time to search for what you're going to do in your second half. It's kind of like a team, you know, having a crappy first half, and we're going to go back to the locker room, regroup, rethink our strategy, review some tape, and go back and change things up. And that's basically, so I treated COVID as my halftime. And some of it was conscious, some of it was subconscious. But essentially, what that halftime for me was a search for belonging. And it was something that I really never embarked on because Social Tables was the main act the previous, I'm all round up, decade. So in my 30s, like this kind of prime time. So my late 20s, early 30, like 30, 20, 28 to 36 was this time that was basically sacrificed for the business. It was sacrificed because it was a surrender. It was a good thing, but all the stuff that people do to find belonging in their personal life, I just wasn't doing. And arguably perhaps replacing it with what I was getting from the company.
So your sense of belonging was actually the business.
That's right. I mean, a lot of people say that's like your firstborn. It's like there's many analogies, overused analogies. For me, because of the traumas I shared in the beginning of this conversation, I always had this desire, just like the birthday in fourth grade, I always had this desire to bring people together because I never experienced togetherness because of my adoption, because I was given up for adoption and I lost my nuclear family, my biological connections. I never had togetherness. So I always tried to create togetherness and be the person who brings people together so that other people don't experience that feeling. And that's why I'm a uniter, I'm a connector, I'm a unifier, and I'm a gatherer. I've always brought people together, and social tables is just another example of me bringing people together that I thought were really smart, really capable, really fun, because I spent really cool, because I was going to spend a lot of time with them, people that were a good culture fit. And that's how early on at least, because once you get past 40 people, it's harder. But early on, I was getting so much belonging from social tables.
Yeah, I like the post that you made a few weeks ago, and that's what I reached out to you at that time. So now you're working on a book.
I am.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's a year late. It's called The Quest, and the subtitle is The Definitive Guide to Finding Belonging. And it's being published by Forbes Books. And it is a cookbooky kind of process for how people can find belonging. It's very research backed. I cite about 100 academic papers and literary works.
Wow.
And it contains the process I developed during that halftime of how people can find belonging. It's a 3-step process. It's awaken, discover, and fuel. So awaken to your essence, discover your different paths to belong, and then fuel your belonging mindfully. And it's like I said, 3-step process, and tells readers how to find belonging.
So, okay, can you say a little bit more about each phase and give some example?
Sure. So the first phase, awaken, is basically the idea that you should understand your belonging drivers. What are the things that drive you to belong in the way that you find belonging? So first, let's take a step back and explain belonging. Belonging is the feeling of connectedness with like-minded people. As long as you are feeling like you are seen by them, you share values with them, and they're share an interest with you. So belonging is a two-way street, right? I have to feel like you see me in order for me to feel belonging. And you have to feel like I see you in order for you to feel belonging, and together we belong. So in order to develop that, you need to understand how you get belonging. And there are several scientific instruments we can use to figure that out. One of them is very common. It's your attachment style. Some people are secure attachment. Some people are insecure attachment. Another one is a need to belong score. It's an actually empirical instrument that's independent and statistically valid that tells us what our need to belong is on a scale of 1 through 5.
What is secure and unsecure attachment?
Secure attachment is when you feel like you're not worried about the other people leaving you. The insecure attachment is you being anxious and afraid that people might leave you.
And then you being dependent in that case.
Exactly. So, for example, adoption, divorce, those kinds of traumas cause insecure attachment. So in the book, I tell people how to figure out what I call their belonging persona. And there's 4 belonging personas. And I give them like animals. So the 4 belonging personas are eager belonging. And that's basically, the animal there is chimpanzees. They're always eager. Chimpanzees are always with each other, they're always hanging out. They're very social, so they're very eager. And then there is meerkats. Those are anxious belongers. They're kind of like, looking around, but they're still in a group, but they're always looking around. Somebody's going to get them. Those are meerkats. So those are anxious belongers. There is independent belongers, and those are wolves. And if you think about it, you could be part of a wolf pack, but you can also be a lone wolf. So wolves are very adept at being alone or together. So that's basically independent belonging. And then I have what I call snow leopards, and those are reserve belongers. They're usually alone. You only find another snow leopard to mate, and then they're alone. So very distinct characters. So the next step number one in belonging is figuring out what's your belonging persona, because based off of that, I can help you discover and evaluate the belonging strategies you employ. So, for example, if you are a snow leopard and you're a part of all these groups, you're not going to feel belonging because snow leopards like to be alone. So, a better path for you might be to read fantasy fiction, because people find belonging through connecting with other characters, but it doesn't give them the anxiety of being with other people. So again, and I talk about this in the book, about all the different paths to find belonging. I call them belonging strategies. And based on your persona, I help you figure out and evaluate the right strategies for you.
That's fascinating, especially when you're talking about all those research paper. Let's say that you're a wolf. So you like to be with people, and at the same time, at the moment, you like to be on your own.
Sure. So there's another concept I introduced in the book, is something called what I call the belonging tank. This is based on research out of the SUNY Buffalo, and where they basically help people figure out which strategies they employ and how much of their belonging tank they fill up. So imagine a gas tank, and you add a little bit of a meeting association event. That's maybe 5%. Then you add hosting a podcast as another one, and then your family and your partner and your friends and your country club, and all those things are different fuels that fill up your belonging tank. And if you have any emptiness left over, that represents loneliness. So some people have a 75% tank with 5 activities. Some people have a 100% tank with 20 activities. It's throughout the book, I help people figure that out. So if you're a wolf, for example, the things that you want many interpersonal relationships because you like people and you get connectedness from being with people, but you don't want a lot of group affiliations because you don't want to be in a group all the time. And with interpersonal relationships, you can choose when to be with them. So many interpersonal relationships, a few group affiliations, and then what the researchers call micro interactions. Seeing the barista, waving to the neighbor, saying hello to your coworker in the kitchen. Those are micro interactions. So those are what wolves should pursue. There's also an entire category of belonging called which is kind of in the non-traditional space. And that's things like eating comfort food, which reminds you of other people. It's following celebrities and influencers, or being followed. There's validation, speaking to crowds and getting awards and driving luxury cars. There's many, many paths to belong. And my goal is to help people figure out what paths are for them.
Fascinating. When is it coming out?
I don't know. Hopefully next quarter, Q1, end of Q1.
That's awesome.
So I just talked about the discover phase, and the third phase is fuel, which is basically I help you develop the skills in the belonging intelligence realm of how you can further strengthen the way you find and keep your belonging. And belonging is part of the work. It changes over time. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you who listen to this podcast, they've gone through a lot of changes just over the past few years, mostly through COVID, but also through life or because of life. And, we've maybe cut off some friends, developed new ones, joined organizations, left some, so because of that, belonging is just part of that thing that we always should be evaluating and kind of, maintaining the instruments of.
That's fascinating. Really. It's just, I look at what you've done in your life when you are today with this completely different, and somehow it's kind of continuity of your journey, which is wonderful.
It is. I mean, I think for me, one of the biggest things at Social Tables was developing this kind of culture we were very proud of. Everybody really, all our tablers, we call them tablers, our employees, they were, to this day, just yesterday, I got a LinkedIn message from one young person. They identify as them now. So I want to just make sure I get the pronouns right. But the bottom line is, at the time she was using pronoun she, and now she identifies as them. And she told me, thank you for helping me find my voice. It was thanks to Social Tables I was able to find my voice and be myself. So I get messages like that a lot. I mean, we've created 3 marriages, thanks to our culture, people meeting at the company, 3 marriages, there are at least 3 companies that have 3 or more employees outside of the buyer. So they are following each other and hiring each other. So, and we've created some entrepreneurs as well. We had a very good culture by many multiple measures. And at the same time, I feel like I could have done better because I feel like I wasn't, at the end of the day, that culture was being used to drive people really hard. And I feel a little guilty about that. And I think I was kind of projecting where like, I get belonging from this company. Why don't you get belonging from this company? Where now I'm realizing belonging should actually come from your personal life first, and then your professional life. And we kind of have it backwards in America. And a lot of it is to blame this kind of like fake DEI B. Now they added the B to it. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Great in theory, terribly executed by practitioners who don't know what they're doing. And the reality is belonging should be found outside of work. And then we should work on it home. But the idea that I tell you, you belong here, employees know that's bullshit because some people are underperformers. They don't belong there. Some people are lazy. They don't belong there. So the idea that tell everybody that they belong there is absolute BS. It's insincere, it's disingenuous, it's inauthentic, and it's dangerous.
Why is it dangerous? I agree with you, but explain that.
It's dangerous because it ends up pissing off high performers. It ends up alienating certain groups when that, ironically, it's supposed to not alienate certain groups. And DEI should make sure every person has a voice. It doesn't mean that the company decides what voice should be put on a pedestal. And a lot of practitioners think they're social justice, or they act like social justice advocates in the workplace, when the only responsibility they have is a fiduciary responsibility to the business to ensure everybody's heard so that the business is successful as possible. That's who they're serving. They don't serve the UN. They don't serve political candidates. They don't serve political parties. They serve the organization, and they have to make sure that everybody has a voice and nobody's left out, and not put anyone on a pedestal, including those who may not be on a pedestal in society, which is a different issue, important, but different issue.
Wow. I said, wow, because there's nothing that I disagree with. And it's very unusual for me to hear people saying it as bluntly and with the right words, as you said. What is the type of reaction you've had if you've been speaking, been out loud with that?
Share 2 stories. So I went and did a keynote at an event, and they told me, "Hey, yeah, that keynote was great, but it was exactly the opposite of what we heard all day. It was for young professionals. They had all this DE&I training." And I was like, "Great, that's just a different way to think about things." And I've been people try to cancel me on LinkedIn. There's an entire kind of what I call the DEI social justice army. And actually real DEI professionals, or I should say successful DEI professionals, probably the better, or professional DEI professionals, have come to, they DM me and they would say, "You're right. You know, it's a shame what's happening in our field." But they've tried to cancel me for some of the things I've said in terms of DEI and what, sharing that opinion I just shared.
Just to be clear, you
can't cancel me though.
Yeah, right. You should listen to an episode I had with Evan Neerman called The Cancel Culture Curse. He wrote a book about that, which is phenomenal. But I was just saying that I think you and I both agree that diversity is important, equality is important, integrating people is very important. It's just the program and the way it has been designed, and more importantly, the way it has been executed leads to a disaster today.
That's exactly right. And I think that the problem is that in corporate America, startups have a little more nimble and can experiment more with this stuff. In corporate America, it is kind of an arms race of who can out DEI the other person. And again, there are professionals out there who understand that their responsibility as DEI professionals is to make sure everyone has a voice and no one feels like they don't. And that's it. It's not to put up anybody else not to give anybody a megaphone necessarily. Some may argue you have to have awareness and all these things, but I think it's a real slippery slope because, I mean, you have affinity groups being created, and we saw this a little bit of this in social tables, but I know that at CVent, for example, there's affinity groups. There is the Jewish group, the Muslim group, the Black group, the Asian group, the LGBT group, and it's just we worked so hard, and sure, they want a safe space, and that's totally understandable, but that's also a little, I don't know what the right word is. It's just a little bit, it may
It's
not
actually
achieve, it
divisive
may
from
not,
I'm listening to you.
well, yeah, divisive, but it may not achieve the objectives that it has. Because if our goal is to be diverse and have inclusion, then yes, we can give people safe spaces to be with their peers, but we got to make sure so they get belonging. But then what about everybody else? How do they get
Mhm.
belonging? Like, how does the person who doesn't identify as a minority group or underrepresented group get belonging? The response some DEI professionals have, oh, they get belonging everywhere else. They have a privilege in the culture. They're out. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the workplace. If we're talking about belonging in the workplace, everybody needs a sense of belonging, and everybody who doesn't belong there needs to get out. The problem is if you're going to do belonging, you also have to do non-belonging. So it's like, you
Yeah.
know, and it's okay. Not everybody belongs. That's the whole thing about belonging, is that not everybody belongs everywhere.
Yep.
If everybody belongs everywhere, you belong nowhere. And what I think Priya Parker in her book, The Art of Gathering, talks about conscious exclusivity. That's what I think is important, is being exclusive, being conscious about it, not violating anything while doing so, but making sure we are, for example, we are high performers. So people who are not high performers don't belong here. And yes, we can have all these affinity groups, but that doesn't mean that people who don't identify with them don't belong here. They do. And we need to make sure that they feel that way too. Because we work so hard at making underrepresented minorities and POCs and so forth feel belonging that we exclude everybody else.
Absolutely. And when you were talking about all the different group and affinity, my gut reaction was, okay, but where is the common point with everyone? And to your point, the common point here is the company,
That's
the company,
right.
the business. Business has to thrive.
That's right. I think we're going to see a backlash at some point. So, and look, I think culture is like a pendulum, right? Like we under-index on culture and over-index on culture, and under, like it's just a pendulum. And we all know the truth is somewhere in the middle all the time,
Yep.
all the time.
Absolutely.
So the truth is somewhere in the middle here, and there are thoughtful ways to do it. And I don't think a lot of people get it right. But then again, I don't have a lot of experience since I've only worked in small companies, so I don't probably know what I'm talking about. I just know that if people have belonging outside of the workplace, this is not going to be as big of an issue, because you have to find belonging outside of the workplace.
Yeah. And talking about backlash, I strongly recommend to read the Free Press from Barry Weiss. And she has article on that, and she's phenomenal, and all the articles make you think. That's what I like at the end of the day. Because when people say you need to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversation, I call it BS. Because as soon as you start having uncomfortable conversation, then people start canceling you or trying to say no or ostracizing you. In theory, they want to hear different opinion, and practically speaking, they want to hear their own opinion, which obviously I disagree with. So thanks for mentioning that. Listen, Dan, it's a podcast, and I would speak hours with you. Unfortunately, with the format, I'm not Joe Rogan, cannot go for 2.5 hours, although I'd love to. But I really want to thank you for taking the time, for sharing all those ideas. What I love is having conversation with people that make me think, and you definitely achieved that today. So thank you so much. I just want to ask you, when we meet again in 1 year with a bottle of champagne, what are we going to celebrate?
Hopefully the birth of my first baby.
Umain.
Amen.
I'll drink to that. How do people get in touch with you?
I am no longer on Twitter, or no longer checking Twitter, so that's not an option. I can't stand what that platform has become. But my website, donjberger.com, is the best place to find me, and my email and everything else.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Dan, thank you so much for sharing that with me and with all the listeners. I love having honest conversation, frank conversation, and this is definitely one of my favorite. Thank you again very much, and good luck with the book, The Quest, and all your research about belonging. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to reach out to me, please go on LinkedIn, connect there. And if you learn anything today, please share this conversation with your network. Thank you.